Greetings, everyone, to the second episode of Algorithms of Empire, co-hosted with me, your host, Dr. Clay Gilmore, and my co-host, Rakeem Shabazz from Wise the Dome. This is a podcast that's really focused on looking at AI from a new perspective. AI is usually marketed through these utopian promises in technological singularity and efficiency, but its foundations are actually in war making, surveillance, and forms of control. So, this podcast is going to inquire into how the military origins of AI bleed into civilian life, from drone warfare and predictive policing to hiring algorithms and consumer data markets. So in this episode, me and Rakeem want to begin by just reflecting on the conclusion of the Witcher Reading Group, which we end up reading Dr. Sarah Shoker's work, Military Age Males and Counterinsurgency and Drone Warfare. So I'd love to get your impressions of her work after having a conversation with
Oh
you, Rakeem.
man, amazing work, very eye-opening. And so there were so for one, it she brings you along, introduces you to certain military concepts, international law concepts, how they are, manifested within the within warfare, within wartime, even in media. And so this idea of military age males and the exclusion and no, the military age males and how um it kind of blurs the line of civilian and combatant status, right? And as today, as we know, the whole thing in Venezuela happened, and the first thing that I thought, I saw a Venezuelan journalist talking about how they were going to do a tally on the civilian death count with the Venezuelan bombing today. First thing I thought, who's included in this death count, right? And I think this, Dr. Shoker, she explains,
Right.
who's included in these death counts, who's excluded, why, the logic behind it.
Right.
Um, you know, even the ideas, certain ideas like, drone warfare being presented as a more precise warfare. It gives the public the idea of, this is more humanitarian than other forms of warfare, when in actuality, she shows that it's not necessarily the case. So yeah, I mean, it's so much we can get into, but
Yeah.
amazing book, man. It was very eye-opening. I think it helped me to understand counterinsurgency a lot deeper, um, just from because again, showing how this worked in Iraq and Afghanistan was was really important for me to conceptualize what coin counterinsurgency looks like in real life. You know what I mean?
Right.
When we
Right.
read Galula, a lot,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, he definitely, uses real world examples, but it's a it's like a manual of theory. He's telling you
Yes. Yes.
how this works. With Shoker, she shows this actually being implemented, and yeah, again, very eye-opening.
No, no, I think most of the participants of the reading group agree with you, man. They were really, really engaging with it a lot and got a lot from it, man. I mean, I think my favorite part of the book is definitely how she shows that this category is not something that's new, right?
Yes.
So other people will try to limit it to the post 9/11 period, and she shows that it's deeply embedded in how the US fights wars. But of course, my other favorite link of it is that fifth chapter, right? Because there she shows you how these logics condition the use of all these mass surveillance technologies.
Hmm. Hmm.
Many technologies that we associate in the commercial sector with large language models, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, right? That part of this population centric approach leads to the deployment and application of these things. So in many ways, these types of asymmetric conflicts are like laboratories
Right.
for technology and scientific innovation. And that fifth chapter really gets at that. But even there was some section in the third chapter I thought was fascinating. It even inspired me to do a couple visualizations.
Yeah, indeed, which we will definitely build on here in a few. I think
Okay.
one of the things that was very important in her work is, well, we've talked about this off air plenty of times, but algorithmic bias, right? And the reproduction of social bias through these technologies. We often talk about these technologies like there's some sentient being who that's that, look at like people will say things like, well, AI is racist or AI is sexist or AI is this or that. But what logic is it reproducing, right? And I think that is an important for people to understand. And instead of looking at AI algorithms, automation as this standalone thing that's learning on its own, these data sets that it's using, and the programmers and all of the people that
Yeah, I mean,
go
she don't
into
she talked about
creating
that.
this.
I think she called
Yeah.
him hypermanned,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
There's so many people involved, so many different actors involved. And I really like this point you're saying because this is a big problem in the ethics of AI literature that you either get AI treated as if it's a separate entity by itself that's going to impact humanity,
Hmm.
um, or we just overlook it altogether and overlook how it's affecting humanity right now.
Right.
But
Right.
there's either a underappreciation or an over exaggeration that clouds out what Shoker is showing, that these things take shape through bureaucracies, through people,
Hmm.
or the humans are in the loop as the in the military sense, right? And this our action and agency is having an impact on what these algorithms produce for us.
Yeah, there's a quote, and I have to paraphrase because I don't have the quote in front of me. But she does obviously a lot of interviews in this book, as part of her research. And one of the guys was, one of the I'm not sure what his rank was, but it was a military member, and he was saying that, people assume what he was paraphrasing. I'm paraphrasing, but people assume that there is no that me pressing a button from, you know, nations away, right? In some cases, to exterminate a target, what that actually does to the soldier, right? Like they'll present it as if, it has no effect on the psyche of those who
Mhm.
are involved in these in autonomous weapons and drone warfare, but they're saying otherwise. The soldiers are saying otherwise, like this affects us just the same way as if it was up close and personal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Some of the people she cited, I've actually read their literature on. That's really interesting stuff.
Mm,
It's different, like
hmm.
when you're supposed to look at a screen and you can't look away.
Hmm.
It's very counterintuitive the way some of the sensors are set up. So you have to be very intentional and see everything.
Right.
And it does have deep, deep psychological impact. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What about one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you, the idea of signature strikes and
Right.
based on behavioral patterns, rather than like a verified identity.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, I,
that's
I cite that all the time,
hmm
man. Like, I had a paper come out earlier last year now, and I cited that distinction because it's so important to
hmm
me. Because I mean, I talked about this in my dissertation, but I think the real impact of counterinsurgency is its ability to socially engineer people
mm,
into certain patterns and forms of life.
hmm
And that's why I find it so significant that they use patterns of life and mobility,
hmm hmm
he shapes space. So I call it proxemics in my dissertation, but it's really just the control of space, how bodies and objects move through it, right? And if you move through space the wrong way, you can be targeted for death for that.
Wow.
You
Wow.
know,
And remember,
I-
she told us that some journalists got
right,
caught up
right,
because they couldn't differentiate insurgents and their behavior patterns with journalists, right? And so what is it? Also, what about the idea that women don't go outside, right? Because she mentioned that as well.
Yeah, no, I seen this in my dissertation research with the creation of projects in the United States. Project builders, as Black people started to move in them, were constructed in a way that allowed for space to facilitate better surveillance.
That's deep.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so you see, it's of young males.
Hmm.
They create the Juvenile Justice Act of 1974 to arrest young Black males.
Mm.
Uh, when non-white children are caught up in it, judges let them go.
Right. Right.
Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
the application of it is still that gender, like you will see in, in Afghanistan.
I think that's very, very profound point about what counterinsurgency does to the geography, right?
Right. Right.
Um, Again, that's also something that she talks about some. I know we're not going to stay on it too long, but it's such a
Yeah.
dope book.
I was just,
I want people to definitely read it and check it out, and also check out the interview as well. Um, the story about Omar Khadr, or Qadir, that was very, and Abu Ghraib. Can you, for people that might not know, like, anything about Omar Qadir, like, uh, let's just kind of talk about that just a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Because
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that was.
No, no, no.
Mhm.
He was uh, from what I remember, a Canadian citizen,
Mm,
who was like a child. I think he was the
hmm
youngest person confined on Guantanamo Bay. And I think Guantanamo Bay itself is an interesting kind of phenomenon. There's an article I've been wanting to write about it since last year. I just haven't had the time yet. But overall, there's been no women or children officially confined there.
mm,
There's only been men,
hmm
and the total is around 750 or so.
Wow.
Many of them have not been charged with crimes.
Right.
They've been arrested preemptively,
Hmm.
uh, and they've been subject to forms of isolation that are very common across the United States that can actually be traced back to plantation isolation units in Texas.
Mm, damn.
So, yeah, it's really interesting to see these long genealogies of forms of control and techniques of control within the context of counterinsurgency.
Hmm.
I'm always fascinated by that when you look at the patterns of confinement
Yeah.
throughout that war and the different tactics used to torture prisoners.
Yeah. I thought one thing that was interesting too is like how she mentions, sometimes it might be a little bit brief, but if you have eyes to see, you understand about how police departments often would see things that worked overseas and say, "Hey, how can we,
Right.
implement something similar here at
No,
home?"
absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. I mean, I've seen this countless times. So, I mean, this gets to, part of the newsletter that the Institute actually just put out. I mean, this point was apparent to me as a military veteran, when I came home from serving, that many of the tactics and approaches to civilian populations that I was exposed to at the School of Infantry, as a United States Marine, was actually used by domestic police departments in
Hmm.
my neighborhood, and in response to violence and in anticipation of violence, especially after the killing of Mike Brown. I mean, it was really, really hard. It was hard not to be struck seeing,
Yeah.
places you used to visit on TV with tanks rolling down the street. You
Right.
know,
Right.
you know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
like it's blatant. Blatant like martial law. Mass confinement. Control of space, like I was talking about, right? You have to be inside at a certain time. You can't go to certain areas. You could be automatically arrested. And then there's the whole Black identity extremism
Yeah.
program that happened, that was really born in St. Louis, a mass surveillance program using counterterrorism tactics under the Obama administration. So, I kind of seen these things,
Hmm.
which kind of led me to look at and explore these things, as a student,
Right. Yeah, I mean, even at the the talk you gave at North Carolina Central when you were talking about some of these things domestically, there was a veteran in the audience who stood up and said, "Hey, yeah, this is the same thing that we were deployed to do overseas, right?" And
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
shows you that connection. Last thing, I mean, I guess like one of the main and most important parts of the book is how, in a lot of ways, gender being, or functioning as a tool for, you know, targeting, right? And technology, a targeting technology. Like for those who may have, heard about counterinsurgency, read a little bit about it, but may not understand that aspect of it, which is also I got obviously one of the main points of the book. But could you talk briefly about what the designation of military age male, what does that say? Because even there's one quote in the book that very, very eye-opening. Whenever she talks about childhood being a social construct, right? And I'm not meaning to jump from top, but I just had to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
that
yeah,
because
yeah.
that was very, very eye-opening. And so
No.
now we
Yeah.
have this idea of male 16 to 60, um, you know, excluded from civilian death tolls, right? Um, Even we can see how this affected immigration policy in places like Canada, where
Right.
single males from where was it, Syria, whenever they were seeking asylum in Canada, single males were put to the bottom of the queue. So
Yeah.
when it comes to counterinsurgency, can you talk about the gender logics that exist within the whole idea of coin?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, Shoker's book gets at this in ways we've discussed. But I think as a black male study scholar, man, like there's something deeper here that's beyond the realm or the scope of Shoker's study,
Hmm.
which is good.
Hmm.
But these patterns of targeting, these go back to the original formulation of counterinsurgency as a kind of warfare against non-white people.
Hmm.
Okay, and the original formula or designation of this was called savage warfare.
Hmm.
And savages are not, this is not just a slur or an insult. This is a scientific term.
Hmm.
Okay. People have degrees and professional associations from schools like my alma mater, the University of Edinburgh, who write dissertations on the nature of the savage and their progress of civilization.
Wow.
Right. And the savage has a certain configuration.
Hmm.
And the first characteristics ascribed to the savage are short, brutish, dark skinned, and hostile to women.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So there's this view that racialized males coming out of the Enlightenment are the opposite of what it means to be civilized. And they're the opposite of they represent a threat to a secure state, a secure society.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
need a state to protect people from them,
Right.
and
Right.
that gendered pattern of targeting. I mean, I've seen evidence that like just civilizationally, it goes deeper into the European Middle Ages. There was always this idea in European folklore of the savage male,
Hmm.
hairy and unintelligent and threatening. But this really takes shape during the colonial era after the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries and slavery. And those variables, those correlates, that's what's given us modern counterinsurgency,
Right.
right? That term counterinsurgency doesn't exist until the 1950s.
Hmm.
Before that, they're called small wars or savage wars, right? And that's for that reason, right? Because it comes with not only a gender logic, but a kind of racial, a kind of racial division
Hmm.
between civilized peoples and uncivilized peoples.
Yeah, right. You know, and on the point about the uh, when Shoker talks about childhood being a social
Right.
construct, it makes you also think, right? Because again, we have seen white kids in America, or I'm sorry, we've seen white adults who are just reaching adulthood, like 19, 20. Whenever they do something wrong, media will say they're just kids, right?
Right.
But we'll see black children, 14, 15, um, be referred to as, men, adults,
Sure.
and by the same justice system and same media. And you see that play out also with the military age male designation within counterinsurgency, because again, who they are deciding who has a childhood, who gets to be a child, who gets to be seen as a child. And I just think that is a very powerful point. One more thing, bro, one more thing, because I just want the audience to get a good understanding of some of, because obviously we're talking about technology as well, AI. You and Rennie wrote a paper about Western humanism and the logics of Western humanism, using a Sylvia Wynter framework and showing how that is reproduced within AI and today's technology. We did a show on that on Wazadome TV, but for Algorithms of Empire, I would like for you to kind of explain the premise of your paper some, because I think it fits in this overall conversation very well.
Yeah, well, I think actually not only does that paper fit, but the newsletter fits too, because a lot of that paper grew out of my dissertation.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
you
Well, you want to
know,
get to the newsletter then?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
because I
let's
think
do that.
it's good for the audience too to like what is counterinsurgency?
Yeah, right,
You know,
right.
so,
Hmm.
the Clay Gilmore Institute actually published our first newsletter just 2 weeks ago. And I was humbled and honored to have one of the board of directors, Dr. Tony Gaskew, who's also a combat veteran, share his experience and define some key terms for the audience. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to see it, cg-iptc.org. You'll be able to see it right up there on the front. But Dr. Gaskew gives us some definitions, and I think two of them are really important
Hmm.
to kind of ground this conversation. The first is counterinsurgency, and it's defined as actions directed at suppressing or neutralizing insurgent populations, including their cultural, social, political ideology, and lived experiences. And the second one, I think, that's really important to define is the aim of counterinsurgency, which is pacification.
Yes.
Right. So this is the use of an array of combination of programs primarily directed at non-combatant civilian populations, designed to extend the presence and influence of the counterinsurgent state or government and to reduce the ideological presence or influence of potential insurgents, using, like I said, a vast array of mechanisms: propaganda, political violence, subversion, institution building, NGO programs, and civilian institutions. Now, with those, with that basic knowledge base, now I think we can really have a fair and balanced, discussion about what's really at stake here in terms of Western humanism
Hmm.
philosophy, right? Because as philosophers, part of what we as Black male study scholars brought to that paper was this insight that I was just talking about earlier, that within Western philosophical anthropology, there is a split between what is defined as the human, right? The 18th century births the human sciences out of the influence of the Renaissance in an attempt to replicate the scientific revolution in terms of natural science and chemistry in terms of social science, right? So you get the birth of the human sciences, anthropology, sociology, literature, right? Linguistics, philology, it was called, right? And so with this idea of the human has a categorical or dialectical opposite,
Hmm.
and it's the savage,
Hmm.
right? These two things, they are opposites, but they occupy the same space. you right? They come from the same bedrock of ideas,
Right.
right? About what
Right.
is a
Hmm.
and throughout history, we show in the paper as this develops, as scientific progress develops, you get re-articulations of what that means. This basic division never leaves.
Right.
It's just re-articulated in new grammar.
Hmm.
Right? So once the Darwinian evolution occurs, it's articulated in terms more of biology,
Yes. Right.
right? Now, in my dissertation, what I tried to show is that this is also shifted in the 1950s,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And this is what has given us our new cultural grammar or articulation of racial difference, right? But counterinsurgency has also shifted with that,
Right.
right? So instead of being justified through the civilizing mission or these old categories of civilization and racial uplift, right? And the white man's burden to uplift these institutions, you get appeals to economic development,
Hmm.
political peace, stability, right? Arguments around cultural pathology and behavioral management,
Yeah.
right? If people behave the right way, liberal democracies can emerge and be
Hmm.
sustainable.
Right. Right.
So,
I
yeah,
mean,
I think,
we see
yeah,
that to be the prevailing narrative everywhere we turn when it comes to, media spaces and or even social media spaces when you look at discourse about where we are in our condition and why we're in it all leads to that, right? And so, but like, so your dissertation,
yeah,
philology, um, you want to let everybody know where they can find that to read or and
yeah,
maybe give them just a quick maybe overview on what
yeah.
philology is.
Yeah, yeah. So philology, I think it could just be found online. The name of my dissertation is Thinking for the Bound and Dead.
Hmm.
So if you look it up, you should be able to find it. But philology, as I formulated it, was really around trying to take the insights of Huey Newton, Sylvia Wynter, and Black male studies,
Hmm.
right, and formulate that into a philosophical theory that can explain the use to which counterinsurgent forms of democratic liberal development, imprisonment, and targeted killings were all simultaneously deployed as the primary force of social regulation in the
Hmm.
21st
Right, right,
century.
right.
And there's four aspects to this, right? So there's the evolution of threat constructions. There's the mastery of counterinsurgency itself in the 1950s, which I spent a whole chapter on. There's technological breakthroughs. So this is where the influence of technology come from,
Hmm.
particularly breakthroughs in signals intelligence, computing technologies, and the creation of the first AI lab. And then there's also the state-sponsored evolution of the modern white power movement,
Mm.
right? Which really functions as an auxiliary of some of the most reactionary elements of the established U.S. State.
Right, right, right. Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
And so yeah, everybody definitely make sure you go to check the newsletter out, cg-iptc.org. All right. And so yeah, so we went through some definitions. We want to talk to them about the exhibit.
yeah, yeah. One thing that I think is important to note before we get to the exhibit, man, is like,
Hmm.
look, I put philology together, but when I was at Purdue, I had the honor of working with Dr. Leonard Harris.
Yeah.
And Leonard Harris is one of the most established and I think underappreciated Black philosophers alive.
Mm.
He's actually a founder of the oldest Black philosophy organization in the United States that's still operating. And when I was there, I encountered really deeply a philosophical theory of his called necrobeing.
Hmm.
And I go through this in a newsletter, but there's a minor premise, right, or one claim of philology as a broader theory that I articulated in a paper called, and the theory is called, or the assertion and the claim is called the racism is warfare thesis. And what I did in that paper when I was there with Dr. Leonard Harris and I had the pleasure of developing it with him is try to blend his theory of necro being with my explanation of racism's counterinsurgency. And one of the fruits of that synthesis is our institute
Right.
and this move toward visualizations.
Hmm.
Now, Lewin Harris doesn't think that you can explain racism. He thinks racism is a killing machine, but he doesn't think you can form a philosophical explanation that can follow
Hmm.
because it's just too multifaceted
Right.
as a phenomenon. I disagree with that, but I think his push has more significance because what he says is that instead of trying to explain, we can just depict. We
Mm.
can depict the harm
Hmm.
and show the correlations and let the correlations speak for themselves.
Right. Right.
Now, I think that killology and this minor claim of the racism is warfare thesis actually gives us a causal mechanistic explanation of these patterns.
Hmm.
So I don't think this is like a gulf that can't be crossed.
Right.
I propose a synthesis. And these exhibits, this first exhibit, this is really the first time that I'm showing this as a kind of a proof of concept.
Hmm.
And this is a proof of concept not just for a philosophical argument, but for what I think is actual can be an observatory on the use of militarized forms of technology, particularly artificial intelligence.
Right.
Um, so I'm going to pull up the exhibits right now and try to share my screen
Cool. Cool. Cool.
so everybody can see them. Okay, I
Yep.
think it should be showing
Yep.
now.
It's showing.
Okay, so if you go to the website, the real theme of the first exhibit is the technologization of counterinsurgency. But overall, the aim is to try to introduce a new way of looking at the philosophy of artificial intelligence, and I'll talk about that toward the end. Um, but with our first series, what I really wanted to show first is how there's this colonial origin of policing
Mm.
as characterized by certain patterns of targeting that is now expressed in the imposition of force, not even digital forms of force or surveillance, but the imposition of lethal force by domestic police agencies. And I don't think this is a dynamic that's particular to the United States. So the examples are not unique to the United States either. Um, and so the first one is from Brazil, Sao Paulo in 2016. You can see, the breakdown and the androcentricity of the violence, right? So not only is it disproportionately black, but it's also disproportionately black male,
Mm.
right? And you can see how that analog form of violence or physical form of conflict is also has a correspondence with the application of digital tools to control black populations. So, for example, in London, there was a report in 2020 that showed that when people are GPS tagged for minor crimes and released from jail, and as you can see, the people who are given GPS tags and surveilled the most are black males,
Yep.
right? In a population where they're about 6% of the total population, they're almost 90%, almost 100% of everybody um, who gets a tag, right? So you can see it like the males are 100%, so it's all males.
Right.
But for black people, right, it's almost 50%, 55%, right?
Mm.
And they're like 5, 6% of that population.
Right.
So these type of disparities, they keep showing up in other forms of violence. So the second um, exhibit is really, this series is focused on, right, the technology of counterinsurgency, but also how death is managed
Mm.
through the application of force, right? So this is from the United States. This is a visualization of the findings of a study that was published in 2019. One of the major findings of this study was that young black males under the age of 29 uh, being killed by the police was the number six cause of death for them,
Mm.
right? So you
Wow.
can see, right, this types of violence. And this is the importance, I think, of black male studies, right? Like as a sex-specific account of violence, there is no scholarly record for Black scholars or any scholars, not even in military studies, looking at counterinsurgency within and outside of liberal democratic states, right?
Right.
So this is another way to, show those same kind of patterns within the race, right? So there is no kind of symmetry when it comes to gender,
Hmm.
right? Force seems to be focused at males.
Hmm. Hmm.
But when you look at more digitized forms of targeting, so this is the strategic selection list from Chicago's predictive policing program. It was studied by Rand in 2016. It was shown to be highly ineffective and racist, right? So it focused their top 20 targets, 76% were Black
Right. Wow.
in the
Wow.
top 20. And you can see the gender composition. So these are the people on the full list, they're 52%.
Hmm.
But the top 20, they're 76%. Right. And you can see the gender composition, right? You see this same kind of focus that you get from like Shoker, right? That she's
Right.
showing this military age male construct, right?
Hmm.
Or what, as a Black male studies scholar, I would say this savage male genre, right? Leads to the innovation and application of new technology. And these were young people too, right? So the
Yeah.
youth were represented, right? So people under the age of 20 were the majority out of those in the top 20,
That says a
right?
lot, man.
Yeah, yeah.
That says
So
you.
this, I mean, in the exhibit, we call this like, look, this is the intelligization of modern repression. Like we're seeing these former patterns of killing be digitized and, transformed through technology, right? But continued another
Yeah.
way.
So you just showed, right? I mean, in the exhibit, obviously, I want everybody to make sure they go to the site so they can see these things for themselves. But as you can see, like the overrepresentation of Black males, like in these different charts, I want you to kind of within in Shoker's book, she quotes um, Australian author and strategist of counterinsurgency, David Kilcullen, and he says, "If you win the women, you own the family unit."
Right.
Uh, when it comes to counterinsurgency, for those who may not understand, what is that actually saying?
Yeah. I mean, so what that looks like is at the same time that you are applying this kind of deadly force to those males, you're also offering women and other non-combatant elements of the population, elderly people and some children, for instance, healthcare, jobs, particularly government jobs, education,
Mm,
right?
hmm.
These are the big three,
Right,
right? Economic support, jobs, education, healthcare.
right.
You can provide for that population because part of pacification is the counterinsurgent convincing that population that the institutions that the white liberal government provides for them is the best they can get,
Mm, mm,
right? They ought to side with them against radicals and revolutionaries. Right. And I mean, like, I like you bringing up Shoker again, man, because, like, these patterns of androcentricity or like male targeting, right, that Black male study scholars have explored, and that I really, focus on like these patterns of targeting. You can see this same thing in the facial recognition
mm,
technology
right. Wow.
data, right? So this is from the Detroit Police Department. I was able to find 2 full years of data in the public domain.
Hmm.
And what you can see is overwhelmingly Black people, about 75% of the city of Detroit, right? That's Black men and women,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Black men are 90% of the targets right here.
Wow.
Together, that's 196 out of 220 targets. They're 90% of the probes in facial recognition technology.
Mm,
So we can see this same dynamic, right?
hmm.
Counterinsurgency comes with the application of surveillance and force in a way where battle age males in the parlance of genocide studies, they're going to bear the brunt of even the non-lethal surveillance targeting, right? Even
Yeah.
when they don't just kill,
Hmm.
right? But just want to surveil. Who are they looking at,
Hmm.
right? So you can see this is another way to look at the same things, right? So these is 2022 and 2023. You can see it broken down, right? Like who's really bearing the brunt of the cutting edge applications of artificial intelligence technologies, right?
Right.
And then the last one, I mean, this is just another contrast, right? So there was this huge map in the police violence database by Washington Post. They kept data for about 10 years now. This is 12 years worth of that data.
Hmm.
This per capita rate of police killings by race and sex is overwhelmingly black males,
Overwhelmingly black
right?
males. Look at that.
Overwhelmingly, right? You can see how the violence is segmented, but very similar to the pattern we've seen in Brazil,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Right? So it's not unique to the United States. It's a
Right.
particular configuration of social control
Yeah.
that we know policing is formulated on counterinsurgency, right?
Hmm.
But like, check this out. So this was the population and demography of a pool of people that the Atlanta Police Foundation used as a justification for a proposal to install these new facial recognition cameras all around the city.
Mm.
Right? These are cutting edge cameras. They have this tilt zoom feature that
Hmm.
allows them to not only detect objects but people.
Mm.
They were going to use repeat offenders. They said, look, we're going to wire up the entire city, but the cameras are only going to look for repeat offenders. Who are the repeat offenders out of 1,000 people? Right? 896 of them. Well, it's 934. 896 are African American males, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but right? When you think about this, and this is the danger, I think, of counterinsurgency and the importance of Shoker emphasizing and others emphasizing this population-centric aspect of it. You know, people push back on this because it would leave the entire area under surveillance, right?
Right.
So, thing Shoker shows in that fifth chapter is that the entire population becomes open for data mining
Hmm. Hmm.
because we're looking for some males. The entire population is under more surveillance. But as a Black male study scholar, right, I'm interested in the explanandum. Like, what is the explanation of this logic and this application of force? That's the gendered application right there,
Right. Right.
right? Criminal Black men, this minority of criminal Black men is the rationalization for the mass surveillance of the entire Black community, right? So
Like
the entire Black community could be transformed into an open air prison with AI cameras because 896 in a city of millions are classified as repeat offenders, uh, by the state,
as
right? So
Shoker, as
this,
Shoker mentioned, they can literally turn a neighborhood, the people within the neighborhood, to unwilling cyborgs, right?
right,
You
right,
know,
no, absolutely,
and
absolutely,
again, I think people need to understand that the same thing that we are seeing in the Middle East, Dr. Gilmore here is showing you Brazil, Detroit, Atlanta. These aren't things that aren't being applied to us. They most definitely are, and um, that's one of the things that this institute and the scholarship that's coming out of this institute will show you is that it's not just a thing that happens abroad. This logic is used, uh, to police, black males in America, and so when we talk about surveillance, right? And we talk about biometrics and all of these and different types of technology, these databases that are created. Um, um, I guess, what people may not, I guess, put two and two together or be able to contextualize what it actually means for your way of life to be that heavily surveilled, right? Like I think we see we see it in movies and sci-fi movies and things of that nature, but I don't think people understand what the real world application will look like. I mean, we can see obviously unless you are a veteran, right? We can see on the news what happens in these situations, during war. Um, but I don't think people can contextualize or fathom what that looks like in the projects near you or the black community near you,
Yeah.
what it means to be that heavily surveilled out in the open, right?
Right.
What does that do to the psyche? What does
Yeah.
that do to your way of life? What does that do to um you know how do you play with your kids in the park that's heavily surveilled now? How do you
No,
it
these are
just
great
changes
questions.
everything, right?
No, no, absolutely, man. It does. And I think that's the importance of visualizations like this exhibit, right?
Hmm.
Because what I think not only are people in a environment where these risks are downplayed, right, for supposed utopian promises of precision and immortality and super intelligence and the new chatbot features,
Hmm.
right? Talk about AI, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about parole boards, why the police was driving down your street 30 minutes ago,
Right.
where your data is being brokered and sold and why.
Hmm.
So, these kind of things, and I think this is the brilliance of Leonard Harris, right? That look, sometimes you need to show people these things. You need
Right.
to see how this is being applied, right? But I
Hmm.
think this is another impact or imperative of like institutionalizing the scholarly intervention of Black male studies in this institute. Because there's all these laws, particularly in the United States. And up here in Canada, we've had a few bills. There was Bill 194 last year. It really didn't come with any enforcement. But there are no laws that impose a mandatory reporting on the agencies using facial recognition,
Mm. Right.
right? There are those laws. And, President Trump has just signed a directive that banned any laws at a state level. So there was a Maryland ban on facial recognition. I'm not really sure
Hmm.
legally what's the status of that,
Hmm.
but I know federally there can't be any more.
Right.
And it's being litigated right now. So there's an active um, obstacle to knowledge about the impacts of these things.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think these exhibits show a proof of concept for a kind of observatory. Like we need an observatory to see how our racialized and marginalized peoples, or even peoples who are designated as terroristic,
Hmm.
enemy of Western country, at war with a Western country, how are Western state agencies using and applying this technology against these people, given the historical correlates we know through works like Shoker and others,
Yeah.
right? There's this relationship between the demonization of these men and the use of mass surveillance technology to predictively kill them,
Yeah.
right? Or
Hmm.
contain them, right? To
Hmm.
not to just do it and wait till they do something, but to get ahead of that,
One
right?
one thing I think we definitely have to bring up is the idea. All right, so when we talk about, especially domestically, when we talk about being surveilled, right? Um, how they can do this under the guise of finding the quote unquote criminal element. But it'll also be used to find, you know, revolutionaries, pro-Palestinian solidarity protesters,
Right.
anybody that the state chooses to criminalize. And as we see now, dissent is definitely being criminalized.
Oh,
You,
absolutely. Yeah.
all of these people will be targets of this surveillance, and they will be, obviously treated like criminals, uh, whether it's imprisonment, deportation. Um, and I just wanted to say that while
Yeah.
it was on my mind because,
No, I mean, this
people,
is what Killology is trying to get at, right?
right,
Like
right.
that, there's a scope to this thing, right? There's a scope that's happening here where, for the first time, I mean, when you look at like the reports that Edward Snowden gave to the Washington
Hmm.
Post, it's really mind-numbing the amount of information that's being stored on an everyday basis for the use of Western intelligence agencies to predict and control behavior.
Right,
Like
right.
we're years past the Cambridge Analytica scandal.
Hmm.
It's no longer conspiracy or like hypotheticals to say that your algorithm is being used to manipulate your emotions
Right.
and determine the politics of the country you live in.
Hmm. Yeah.
This is just the modern world,
Yeah.
you know.
Nah, that's deep, man. Another thing too, can you talk about a little bit, because I think it's important to note how irregular warfare, counterinsurgency is, due to the fact that it's framed as a humanitarian type of warfare to
Right,
win over the hearts and minds of the population through pacification. Can you tell the people why this is seen by many veterans as a feminine type of war?
right. Yeah, I mean, you know, this is the interesting thing, right? I
Hmm.
mean, it's why I'm kind of stunned in our media space when I see some pundits engaging and like going on and on about counterinsurgency. You know, I mentioned some of them in the newsletter, but you know, I think you see it on like Millennials Are Killing Capitalism or you know, some of Jared Ball's videos. But like, you know, contrary to this like representation, this is not a very popular field of study, and it never has been.
Right.
So when you look at like the history of counterinsurgency from a military historian like Douglas Porch, what you'll see is that civilized warfare is what attains status and what people seen as normative.
Mm.
They seen that as ideal work for a soldier.
Hmm.
Counterinsurgency was associated with politics, with what David Kilcullen calls armed social work,
Yep.
and other non-kinetic or not activities that did not involve fighting and killing an enemy, right? It involved learning the enemy language, learning the enemy culture, maybe marrying some of the natives. Jonathan Nagel, one notable author, calls it eating soup with a knife,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
Because you need to learn how to politic with people while also being willing to kill them if they
Yeah.
go against your interest, right?
Right.
That's seen as non-soldierly.
Right.
And the status of counterinsurgency has always been low. I think, you know, one interesting thing is how despite its prominence, at least since the 19th century, Western armies really approach everything from a conventional lens.
Hmm.
Right. They're very like strong-headed about this, particularly the Army and the branch I served in the U.S. Marines. Their entire identity is based around World War II feats in D-Day,
Right.
in versions
Right.
of amphibious assault that really don't exist anymore.
Right. Right.
Right.
You can see
Counter.
in the old movies, they get hyped up by watching old military movies, like the way
Right.
that, yeah.
Right. And they're always conventional
Hmm.
battles.
Hmm.
You know, Vietnam is seen as a shameful type of thing, a dirty kind of thing, a scandalous kind of thing, given the massacres in My Lai. Um, you know, and this is around this is a general type of thing, right? It was seen as colonial imperialism, and it was more related to politics. And so that made it seem more feminine
Right.
rather than masculine, right? Going out in the field, fighting and dying for the country,
Right. Right.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I think that's another thing that I'm glad, like in the newsletter, like how the defining of these terms, they're
Yeah,
extremely important. These are not ambiguous terms. They mean things, right?
right.
And
Right.
again, counterinsurgency within the uh, newsletter, we have the definition: actions directed at suppressing or neutralizing insurgent populations, including their cultural, social, political ideology, and lived experiences. I
Right.
think, again, that is extremely important because we don't want to get it misconstrued where it becomes this blanket umbrella term for any type of violence that is
Right.
happening. You know what I'm saying? Because that's
And
not.
then, you know, I think this is a broader problem in the liberal arts, man. Like I noticed it in the United States being trained in Edinburgh. Like, you know, there's a real push to substitute like evidence, scientific analysis, like empirical analysis for metaphysics,
Mm,
literary criticism,
hmm.
and like speculative, like metaphysical type of ideas
Right.
when they don't agree with the kind of patterns that we would expect from warfare or conflict.
Hmm.
And I think this is just dangerous. You know, I think this is just dangerous. But I do think that this is allowed to be, or this is like kind of allowed to happen because there isn't really a sustained scholarly engagement with the history of modern asymmetric warfare.
Right.
Not, like I said, not in military studies, not in Africana studies,
Now,
not in
why
the
do you think it's not in military studies, though? I mean, I can see why it wouldn't necessarily be in Black studies or Africana studies, but it's very surprising that it's not in military studies.
No, I mean, when you look at what they're writing about, like I read an interesting thesis this summer, man, about like artificial superintelligence, like
Hmm.
thought experiment, like what would happen if one took over and wanted to destroy the United States. It was
Right.
really interesting. It
Right.
was
Right.
like, the Army War College produces some interesting stuff, but like when you look historically, man, most military studies are focused on major battles.
Mm,
I mean, there's just tons and tons of dissertations on the Civil War
hmm.
and the Battle of the Bulge and World War One and the Battle of Belleau Wood. I mean, just books and books and books about the Harlem Hellfighters of World War One and the colored
Right.
troop regiments and World War Two, right? I mean, there's whole fields just on like the bombing of Japan
Hmm.
and Pearl Harbor, like the entire thing,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so, these kind of dirty wars, they're not attractive. The United States really repressed them in the 80s.
Hmm.
After Vietnam, people did like counterinsurgency was kind of like a bad word,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah,
right?
because of the My Lai massacre.
Because of the loss.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
and because like right, we like the U.S. Army went in there to recolonize them
Yeah.
and did not accomplish that strategic objective. It was just seen as embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The kind of high social status that veterans have today, they did not have at that time.
Hmm.
And the industry of military studies and even scholarly studies in the conflict was based around terrorism.
Mm.
I mean, some have called this the terrorism industry because it
Yeah.
was just so easy to get hired and get books and
Interesting.
just to talk about terrorism
Hmm.
and incidents of terrorism. So yeah, I mean, there's a real gap,
Yeah.
and I'm very grateful that the Institute and what we're doing here with our partnership with the Algorithmic Bias Project and the Center for Ethics at the University of Toronto are really jumping head first into this to try to
Yes.
fill this gap, but also look at how its fruits and technology affect people not only outside of liberal regimes but also inside them.
Yes. I think that latter part is extremely important, right? How are um domestically, how does this affect the population? Who is treated like the insurgent population, and how and what are the similarities between how this works from at home to abroad. I think that's extremely important. Whenever you can trace that logic, whenever you can see that, make that connection, it puts everything in a the proper perspective. Also, I think I'm glad like whenever you went through the definitions and you talked about the two most important definitions when we're talking about counterinsurgency and one being pacification. I would just like to read a little bit of that definition
Yeah.
again, and because I think it's extremely important for the people to understand the aim of counterinsurgency campaigns, the use of an array and combination of action programs primarily directed at non-combatant civilians of targeted populations, designed to extend the presence and influence of the counterinsurgent state government and to reduce the ideological presence and influence of potential insurgents using propaganda, political violence, and subversion through a variety of selected NGO programs, military and civilian institutions. And I want people to understand and bring it home and contextualize it by understanding like the history of our own revolutionary movements in the States, right? How the revolutionary organizations were destroyed by Coin and COINTELPRO, and then, with people like the Nixon administration offering an alternative of black capitalism, and this pacification and our community, or in any, community that's going through this, will look at it like, yo, you have a do I want to die or do I want to be in prison for the rest of my life?
Mhm.
Right? They'll make being the being a revolutionary so unenticing, right? And it's like, okay, these social programs, black capitalism, all of these other things that, may give us the illusion of some upward mobility. I'd rather take my chance with that than to be a revolutionary because we see what happens to the revolutionaries.
Right, right. And I mean that's an expressed aim of COINTELPRO, but also like this kind of counterintuitive marriage between killing and development. I mean, this is a basic feature of counterinsurgency. It's very paradoxical.
Mm, right.
But the same state that's conducting mass targeted killing campaigns is also providing people educational opportunities.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
yeah.
but this like this is part of the campaign, right? To
Hmm.
socially engineer people into Western liberal democratic forms of life,
Yep.
or what would in the 19th century be called civilization.
Brother, let me hold on. I'm glad you said that. I just saw like a tweet earlier from somebody saying, "Hey, you can." It was somebody they said that they were in Venezuela, but they talked about how they don't care if the US comes and takes all of their oils. As long as they have social programs and the promise of upward mobility, they're okay. I was like,
Yeah,
damn.
right. I
Mm,
mean, and if you're a counterinsurgent actor, you want to convince a mass of the population to think that way.
hmm
And
hmm
you can win, right?
Yeah.
Victory is in convincing not the revolutionaries, but the supporting population that they would govern if they had power,
Right. Right.
right? That they're actually not in their best interest.
hmm
Right? And it's like I said, it's long, it's drawn out. This is another aspect of why people don't like it in military studies. There's no big battles to this type of stuff
Yeah.
usually.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
I can see
no
that.
there's there's no quick end,
Yeah.
right? After
Yeah.
this major battle, so and so won.
It's not a
No.
good story. You can't make a
Right,
movie out of this.
right, right. You can things can be going your way for 10 years,
Hmm.
then by year 15, things go backwards.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
really long, drawn out series of small battles, no real big event.
Hmm.
So that's not seen as attractive for soldiers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still, you
Yeah,
know.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, like always, man, it's always a dope to, get in this space and
Oh,
build.
yeah.
Everybody, I definitely want to make sure y'all check the newsletter out. The link will be in the description. Um, Algorithms of Empire, episode 2, with me and my good friend and co-host, Dr. Myron Clay Gilmore. Again, thank y'all for tuning in. You want to close it on out?
Yeah, peace out, everybody. Until
Peace.
next time. Yeah, man. Grateful to do it with you, bro.
No doubts. Likewise, bro.